What makes a good MMORPG? If you ask around, then you'll hear about the importance of a large, persistent open world, an engaging leveling journey, an equitable economy both in and out of the game. Well, Lost Ark has none of these things. Last year, I published a video titled Final Fantasy XIV Player Tries 500 Hours of Lost Ark, which focused primarily on my first impressions of the game. I was a tourist back then, absorbing the sights and the sounds of a new digital world, overcoming the discomfort that arises whenever a new MMO functions differently than the one I'm used to. I encourage you to give that video a watch if you'd like my thoughts on the more superficial aspects of the game. In this video, we'll be delving into deeper waters, which include the game's public perception, its culture, and its longevity. Today, as I approach the 1,000-hour mark, I am no longer a tourist. I am entrenched, I'm committed, I've shed my Makoko seed. I am a Lost Ark player, and I have a great deal to discuss about this unforgiving, infuriating, yet hopelessly addictive MMORPG that is, by all accounts, doomed to die. My name is Ember, and this is how 1,000 hours of Lost Ark destroyed my life. But first, let's thank today's sponsor. It's Raid Shadow. I'm just kidding, it's me. I'm on Patreon. Here's the pitch. Get every video I publish 2 days early and ad-free for $1 a month. All right, let's get back to work. Lost Ark has a bad reputation, and it is mostly deserved. Leading up to the Western launch of the game, there was a flurry of content from Russian and Korean players meant to better prepare newcomers who intended to begin their journeys through Lost Ark without having to pay for a VPN and a Korean phone number. I remember all of them distinctly warning against the overuse of these silver feathers, which allow you to resurrect after you've been killed. As you can see, their warnings were overstated. There were discussions about the card system, the engraving system, the best and worst classes to play, and so on, but none so dominant as the discourse surrounding the game's monetization. People debated definitions rather than reality. What does pay to win mean? Does pay for convenience qualify as pay to win? If everything in the game can be earned for free, then doesn't that debunk the claim that Lost Ark is pay to win, and so on and so forth? The answer is that it doesn't matter. What matters is the perception that the game's economic model has inspired in the broader MMO community and how that model affects player behavior. Lost Ark is perceived as a pay-to-win game by the broader gaming demographic, therefore, it is. In contrast to that general consensus, I haven't spent a dime in Lost Ark since last year, but my experience doesn't absolve the game of its scarlet letter. It is designed to incentivize uncapped spending for power, cosmetics, conveniences, and so on, but I got to experience raiding through Volton, Vicus, Cackle Sadon, and Belshazzar despite being late to the game for the low cost of nothing at all. The truth is that when it comes to Lost Ark's economic model, there is some nuance that's worth discussing, but it ultimately doesn't matter. The broader perception dictates reality, and the people who need to be convinced of the value of Lost Ark, which would be any curious newcomers, have already decided that the game is cynical, pay-to-win garbage. The game's economic model has also inspired a series of harmful perceptions within its own ecosystem too. As I made my way through the game's Legion raids, I discovered a sentiment shared by every player who's invested in Lost Ark. Time is literally money. The game is inundated with currencies that are meant to be fed into the honing system, which decides, mostly at random, whether or not you get to make any progress that week. To access these currencies, one must successfully defeat the highest available Legion raids, ideally multiple times per week, which is both a high skill and high stress task. Those currencies are also sold via the in-game market, which puts a literal dollar price on the materials that you need to improve your item level. It only takes a second of mental math to figure out what a scuffed Belshazzar pug costs you in terms of time and money. In tandem, these factors, the limited currencies, the high cognitive load of raiding, the randomized progression system, the costs associated with failure, begin to create a perception which dictates player behavior in Lost Ark. That is, highly exclusionary, meticulously discerning, and completely intolerant to anything less than perfection. Lost Ark is both inaccessible to newcomers and highly demanding of veterans because of the perceptions about the game born from the game's very own design. In my videos, I often bring up the concept of function fulfillment. It's how I describe that effervescent satisfaction that MMO players chase after from one dying game to another. It's the catharsis that you experience when you finish a grind, or when you acquire a long sought after collectible, or when you finally vanquish that evil empty space occupying your experience bar. At the heart of Lost Ark is the most egregious use of function fulfillment as game design that I have ever seen in a video game. Most of your ongoing activities outside of your daily Guardian raids and your weekly Legion raids barely qualify as gameplay. Your daily Unis tasks will often ask you to travel to a certain destination in the world only to click on an object or instantly destroy a few mindless enemies. You might be lucky enough to be flush with completion tickets allowing you to skip the so-called gameplay altogether. Horizontal activities, which are crucial for improving your account's roster level and for getting access to vital skill point potions which allow you to actually play your chosen build, are equally mindless, awkwardly written, and totally devoid of actual gameplay. On the occasions that you do get to play Lost Ark as it was intended within the confines of its raids, you have to contend with people whose minds have been thoroughly poisoned by the game's aggressive dopamine cycle. These people are uncharitable, impatient, and often belligerent. Now, it's not their fault, they've been trained to behave this way by the game's systems. Your primary motivator in Lost Ark is the reward at the other end of whatever activity you're doing, no matter how boring it is. With the exception of Guardian raids and Legion raids, which have the benefit of Lost Ark's superb gameplay, there is little intrinsic motivation to be found in the game. Your relationship to this digital ecosystem is entirely transactional. I give you my time or money, you give me rewards. That might not sound too bad to many of you, and it really isn't, but I often think back to the night that I completed Shadowbringers for the first time. Clearing the dying gasp with all of the narrative heft of Final Fantasy XIV's story behind it, not to mention the incredible soundtrack, I still think back at that night fondly. It was one of the most memorable gaming experiences of my life. Lost Ark has nothing to offer which even begins to approach that level of intrinsic value. What it does offer, however, is a series of lists requiring menial and repetitive tasks to complete, tantalizing the player with crucial materials and rewards at the end of days or weeks or months of repetition, occasionally interrupted by the best gameplay that any MMO on the market can boast. But what does it matter if there's no one to play with? We could debate for hours about the definition of an MMO, but one point that I'm not willing to compromise on is the shared world. Lost Ark asks its players to engage in quite a lot of explorative open-world activities in exchange for important rewards. Mandatory, some might argue. I've engaged in many of these activities myself, as you can see, and I can report from experience that these have been some of the most isolating and least gratifying tasks that I have ever completed in an MMO, which begs the question: why do them in the first place? As I mentioned before, function fulfillment is a powerful drug. I know I'm not alone here either. If you're watching this, then you're likely as addicted to MMOs as I am, which means that you understand that bittersweet satisfaction of finishing a grind or filling out a list, no matter how mindless the process itself was. Lost Ark is built on hundreds of tedious tasks that scratch that particular itch, which is not an unforgivable sin in and of itself. There is some joy to be had in it, I must confess. The issue is that the world has been designed to be left behind, leaving me a highly detailed, undeniably beautiful, but ultimately empty expanse to explore for the sake of satisfying an obsessive compulsion. I think about the hundreds of Makoko seeds that I've gathered, which required me to scour the most hidden corners of the game's world, the dozens of story-based dungeons, the scattered islands across the ocean. I did all of it alone. I saw no one as I moved from one seed to the next, passing painstakingly built environments that exist to be seen once, then to be forgotten. On occasion, I'd run into a gaggle of bots, which made me question whether or not I was literally alone in the world of Lost Ark. One example that stuck out to me was my pursuit of the Giant's Heart at the end of the reputation track for Tooki Island. The island, like many of the islands in the game, appears on a rotating 4-hour cycle and must be completed over the course of several weeks in order to acquire the heart. I'll be honest, having to adjust my schedule around the appearance of this in-game island did not feel great, but I was a man possessed. I needed that thing. On more than one occasion, however, I'd be the only person stupid enough to be on the island, chasing after these kobold goblin creatures and spamming my paladin's useless abilities, desperately trying to convince myself that I was having fun. It was my fault, of course. I should have completed this reputation during the weeks following the game's launch like everyone else did, rather than making the fatal mistake of doing something else with my time. I want to be clear about something. I'm not trying to suggest that Lost Ark is somehow not an MMORPG. I will argue argue that the game lacks that essential quality that sets this genre of video game apart from many others. That is, playing with other people in a meaningful shared space. Things weren't always this way, mind you. I remember playing Lost Ark during its Western release. I remember running the story-based dungeons with full groups, fighting world bosses alongside massive crowds, and even taking on Tooki with dozens of other players. Having stepped away from the game only to return later, the emptiness of Lost Ark's overworld is a testament to how ineffective the game has been at retaining a sizable portion of its initial player base, as well as inspiring those few remaining players to engage with the game's world. While there are other players who idle in the game's many city centers, as you'd expect to find in other MMOs like World of Warcraft or Final Fantasy XIV, these players are truly idle in Lost Ark. In WoW, for instance, sitting in Valdrakken means being connected to trade chat, which is visualized by a flurry of players vying to sell their services. People are flying in, flying out, and going about their business as they set off on their day's agenda. In 14, you might find players performing music together, crafting materials, or posing in order to show off their newest outfit. Lost Ark's transactional relationship to its players extends between its players too, and that's felt in these spaces that should feel like social centers. The game trains the player base to view itself as a means to an end, a tool to access the rewards at the end of a Legion raid, easily discarded if it fails to fulfill its function. Despite the game's many social features, which include customizable strongholds that players can visit and guilds with built-in reward tracks to encourage participation, I have never felt more lonely playing another MMO. I can't even begin to fathom the thousands of development hours and the millions of dollars spent on in-game cutscenes, environments, and features that an overwhelming majority of the player base will never see and likely wouldn't care to see. Lost Ark is singularly focused on offering the best combat experience on the MMORPG market. It achieves this ambition with ease, but there are some fights in the game that are far more difficult to overcome than any raid that Smilegate can conjure. When I made my first video about Lost Ark, I was a Chaos Dungeon and Guardian raid enjoyer. That is to say that I would log in to fulfill my daily tasks, collect my Unus tokens for my weekly stipend, then spend the rest of my time in-game chasing after collectibles or leveling my life skills. That is not the optimal way to engage with Lost Ark. Sure, a person can theoretically enjoy the game without diving headfirst into the Legion raids. I certainly did for a time. But the truth is that the game is the Legion raids, which means that the game is Party Finder. Back then, I was stuck at item level 1490, and the only way to push further into the game was to overcome Belshazzar, which I would have been happy to do, but the issue was, of course, that no one was willing to help a player like me with content that, from the perspective of veteran players at the time, I should have already been familiar with. It's no secret that Lost Ark has a bad reputation for in-game elitism and gatekeeping. This is fueled by the transactional nature of the game, as well as the impersonal environment that it's contained within. The purpose of Lost Ark is to earn resources through raiding as efficiently as possible in order to maximize your character's gains. As I stated before, failure is not just a waste of time, it is a waste of resources. Gatekeeping is a feature, not a bug, of the ecosystem that Smilegate has cultivated. Earnestness and determination alone were not going to convince other players to invite me to lower item level raids, even as a support. But I wasn't discouraged. I decided to search for Lost Ark's various community discords when I stumbled upon the Makoko server, designed specifically for new players who wanted to get together and work their way through the game's high-end content. I found a small but lively community of like-minded players who were just as behind as I was and who wanted to experience what Lost Ark had to offer. I could have gone directly into Belshazzar to work my way towards 1540 and beyond, but my brain has been thoroughly rotted by Final Fantasy XIV, so I opted to do everything in order. Valten, Vicus, Cackle, Sadon, and then Belshazzar. This point of my journey into Lost Ark was when I understood why the players who fell in love with the game have such a difficult time getting away from it. After studying as much as I could about each of the bosses I wanted to defeat, I decided to take it upon myself to create my own learning parties in order to tackle the Legion raids. I developed a philosophy for myself: never rely on other players to approve my entry into their groups. I would always create my own lobby, establish the expectations of that lobby, and show other players the patience that I was never afforded by veterans. With that goal in mind, I established a rhythm with the game, playing as much as I needed to in order to push my paladin to Kyangle while keeping keeping track of the various horizontal tasks that were required of me in order to improve my roster. I had a rotating cast of players who would raid with me for a few weeks at a time. I never established a static or a schedule. It was easy enough to simply drop in, play for an evening, and then move on to another character and do another raid. Suddenly, Lost Ark wasn't lonely anymore. As a matter of fact, it was a fun, manageable, and rewarding experience to play. I really loved it, and while I'm not playing it as actively now as I was in those months leading up to the road to Theamine, the impression the game left me with was positive as a result of my experiences with the Legion raids. The game is deeply flawed, as I've thoroughly covered in this video, but that doesn't mean that it deserves to be entirely overlooked. There is a beauty to Lost Ark that can only be experienced once you decide to stop being a little about putting your own groups together to learn the content. Every time I go to the subreddit and I read about a new player feeling dejected by the game's gatekeeping issue, I feel like I want to pull my hair out. There are likely thousands of other players who are just as interested in learning the content for the first time as they are, but it seems like one step too far to expect those players to form their own lobbies in order to circumvent the gatekeeping issue entirely. I would posit that, for the most part, these players who complain about the gatekeeping issue are often doing so with the expectation that they deserve to be carried through Lost Ark's raids. These fights are not for the faint of heart. They are brutal, punishing, overwhelming, and incredibly rewarding. That's what kept me coming back. That's what makes Lost Ark special, and that is why it's dying. Almost every Wednesday at reset, I log into Lost Ark, I accept my week's worth of Una's tasks, I finish my Chaos Dungeons and my Guardian raids, and I tell myself this is the week that I start my push to the endgame. This is the week that I get back into Lost Ark. Then I log off and I go do something else. I know it might sound like I dislike the game from the content of the script that I'm reading to you, but the truth is the opposite. I think I really love Lost Ark, but I can't bring myself to put any more time into a game that feels as though it's slowly marching towards a sad, untimely end. Lost Ark does not feel like a game that's thriving. Guild Wars 2 has seen its player base more than double in the last few years. I plan to do my next giant 500-hour video about that game, by the way. Final Fantasy XIV has Dawntrail coming up in a matter of months, and it really looks fantastic. World of Warcraft has The War Within and the World Soul Saga arriving soon after. Mists of Pandaria Remix has been stellar, by the way. While Lost Ark is certainly the best of the newest entries into the MMO genre, with games like New World and Wayfinder fading into irrelevance almost immediately, an MMO lives and dies by whether or not people give a shit about it. A healthy, growing population is nearly as important as whether or not the game is fun to play. While I can't say whether or not Lost Ark's player count is growing, it feels like a game in steep decline. The race to world first for Theamine occurred only weeks before the publication of this video, but it passed with a whimper. There's no public excitement about the future of the game. There's not much of an active community for it here in the West. I'm embarrassed to admit it, but this has affected my desire to continue investing into Lost Ark. I suspect that the roughly 1 million other people who played the game and never returned feel the same. It's a shame because I see now, after nearly 1,000 hours, how much Lost Ark has to offer to any one of you out there who, like me, loves this genre of video game. Of course, there is a cynicism to it with the aggressive monetization, but as I've demonstrated, you can simply not spend money if you aren't compelled to. I'd like to reiterate that I haven't spent a dime in the game since last year, yet I've had some of the most fun with the game in that time. It is more than certainly lonely and monotonous, particularly in its mindless horizontal activities, but if you're as obsessive as I am, there is an undeniable satisfaction in filling out the various lists and percentages that Lost Ark hides its skill point potions behind. Its community is one of the most unforgiving, impersonal, and hostile that I've ever dealt with, and yet I dealt with it. I made my own lobbies, I dictated my own terms, and I had a far better time in the game than I expected to have. As I put the finishing touches on this video though, I wonder if it isn't time to say goodbye to Lost Ark. I have faith that my investment in other MMOs will be preserved since those MMOs are thriving, growing even. Seeing Lost Ark end its support in Japan doesn't inspire confidence in the future of this game here in the West. What's more painful about this dilemma I'm facing is that the game's state is entirely self-inflicted. It was designed in such a way to inspire the gatekeeping that prevents new players from being easily integrated into its ecosystem. It was built to influence endless ongoing spending, creating an impersonal, transactional relationship between the developers and the players, as well as the players themselves. It seems as though Amazon and Smilegate are completely disinterested in doing anything to rally players to return to the game or inspire interested onlookers to take the plunge. I want to be wrong, and I hope that I am, but I think that Lost Ark is doomed, and the fault lies with the companies who develop and publish it. Maybe I have to accept that the only thing I can do for now is enjoy it while it lasts. If only you heads would invite me to your lobbies. This video was a lot of work to put together, so I want to say thank you to any of you that are still watching. Feel free to leave me some feedback in the form of a like or a dislike, and go ahead and let me know what you thought of the video in the comments. I read them all and I respond to most. If you're feeling generous, then don't forget to subscribe, hit the bell on the way out for more MMO content. If you're feeling exceptionally generous, then check out my Patreon. All videos 2 days early, ad-free for $1 a month. This channel is such a passion project that I actually make all of the music that you hear in every video on the channel. I love doing this, so your support on Patreon would mean the world. Alright everyone, I'll catch you next time, minding my manners of course. Thanks again for watching.